Hey everyone, good morning, good evening. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes for people to join and we'll start. Is my screen visible? You can post your comments in the chat. Okay. So last week, whatever we saw is with respect to the basics of client-server architecture, right? So like how, what is a client and how it is able to communicate with the data to the server, and how the server is able to get the data from the different sources like databases and other servers, CDNs, and all those things. Right. We'll start right away with the basics of APIs as well. We also saw some basics of what's an API components, right? So what is the typical API component actually? For example, let's say, let's go to a Google website, right? So when I say component of an API, we first have an endpoint, right? So the endpoint, this is a protocol, and this is the domain part and endpoint, right? For example, let's say anything here, ABC, something like this can endpoint, whatever that comes after the domain, right? And whatever comes after this question mark, we call that as a query parameter, right? For example, let's say name is equal to some XYZ. And we separate this query parameters with this ampless and simple, right? So what's the purpose of this query parameter? The query parameter is to fine tune our search into our server side, right? Now, if we just hit google.com, it will go to something called home route. I think we saw all these things yesterday.
I have one question. Path parameter and query parameter both are same, or any difference is there?
Both are different. For example, let's say I have a website where we track the activity of a student, okay? Or we have some student kind of database. Let's call that website as myschool.com. Okay. So let's say if I wanted to get all the students' details, generally how we'll design an API is like we'll give /students. Okay. So what's the path parameters? For example, typically we give the path parameter the scenario like, for example, if I wanted to get the details of the student whose ID is number 1, right? I'll give something like this, right? So the domain name / the endpoint / that resource ID in the path parameter. It's not a query parameter, right? So whereas if I wanted to fine tune the search, what I will do, I'll put a question mark and say name is equal to, sorry, name is equal to some, let's say John or something. And the email is equal to something, right? John@gmail.com or something like that. So this particular, this is a path parameter. Generally, we pass path parameter like ID kind of data to uniquely identify the particular resources that we are looking for in our database. Whereas the query parameters to fine tune our search into our database. Hope that answers the question.
Query parameter means it's
Yes.
anything coming after question mark within that.
Sorry.
So anything coming after question mark will be the query parameter.
Yes, yes, right. Even this particular, why we call this as path parameter is the student is going to be a fixed, but this is going to be varying data. If I wanted to find a reach of student 1, this is going to be it, and I can put 2, 3, or whatever, right? I can put 2 here, 3 here, right? So depending upon the ID, whatever data which I wanted to fetch, I'll be able to fetch here. It's not only for get request, even it's applicable for put request also. For example, if you wanted to change some data for the student whose ID is 3, I don't need query parameters in that case. I will have a request body, right? The request body, what I will do, I'll pass the, if I want to change the name, first name or last name, I'll do here, right? Okay. As a JSON data. So even in this case, I wanted to uniquely identify what I just cannot change this first name or last name for every other student that is in our database, right? So I want to uniquely identify a resource in our database. So for those purposes, also path parameter is useful. Right? Hope that answers the question. And whatever generally, if I hit to this website, right? This is called home road. It will take us to whatever the home path, or generally a website will be loaded. And typically, this API is used to get the particular data that we intend to load from our database. Right? What are the other components of API? This endpoint is there. Nothing but URL or URI, whatever you wanted to call along with the query parameters and all those things. And we have headers, right? Header information. So what are the header information that we might be aware of? Any answers? So there is something called content type. Right. So what type of content that I'm expecting or sending? Typically for a JSON content type, we'll say application/JSON. Or for XML application /XML, someone said in the chat. Okay. And let's go to the Postman and check the other kind of headers information, typical header information. Okay. This thing is related to the Postman book. It's a particular to only Postman, and there's something called content link. How much? What's the length of the content that we are intending to send? Right. What is the host name? Right. Host is what? What's the like a machine that you are currently that's sending the post and all. Right. There's something called user agent. Right. I think I talked about what's a user agent last week. I guess if I'll just do a quick recap also. The user agent is nothing but complete information of like what is the browser you are using, what is the operating system you are using, and all those informations, right? What's the device type that you are using and everything. And accept says again, accept what kind of data. Here we say accept every kind of data, right? And accept encoding or not. Yes, we accept gzip and the types of encoding also. Connection we keep alive or we'll terminate the connection immediately. We choose to keep alive. And there's something called, this is a custom key. It's not a, like the value here, right? Whatever we give here. So what is this authorization again? So authorization is, why we need authorization? Actually, I think we spoke about what is the difference between authentication and authorization last week. Why do we need that? Simply no. Everyone should not hit any API, right? There should be some control over who can hit the APIs. For example, if you're registering to a particular service, you're subscribing to that particular service, they'll give you some authorization token, security token, right? Simply, anyone who is not paid for that subscription service should not get that particular data. Anyone who has to anyone who is subscribed has to get the particular data, right? So there comes authorization. There are many kinds of authorization. Typically, like for example, even the postman has all these things. There is a specific section called auth, right? And no authorization is like nothing. There is no authorization at all. And typically API key, right? There is something called key and value, right? Key is whatever we choose to give here, right? It can be, it is a custom implemented key name that is that server is expecting, and value is whatever server is actually expecting to uniquely identify you as an authorized user, right? There's something called bearer token. It just gives some token information which may be encoded or not encoded, depending upon the context of the server. There is something that also. And there is some basic authentication, typical username and password kind of authentication, right? Those authentications are also there. And OAuth, how many of you know about OAuth? For example, typically when you log into the other applications, you may choose to log in with your Google or Facebook account. So in those cases, you'll be authorized to, you'll be like, the application will be asking you for authorization permission. Hey, authorize us to access the Google account or Facebook account and log you in, right? Those kind of mechanisms uses OAuth. So when you say OAuth 2 is currently the standard, so you should give the OAuth configurations, like you should set up all these things. This kind of information, for example, if you are registered with the Google services for OAuth, they will be providing all these details. So you should give client ID, client secret, and all those things, and you have to log in into the particular application using Google or Facebook kind of services. Okay. Typically for our use for general purposes, most of the times OAuth will be used, but API key or bearer token or basic authentication will be the most of the times most of the people would use. But good to know all these things are there. Akamai AWS is a cloud-based, CDN-based authentication mechanism, right? But generally, Postman allows all these features to be used. Actually. So authorization is there. So what else can be the part of an API request? Request body, right? So the question is, do GET requests have a request body? Can you answer? Typically not.
No.
Yeah. So the API, because GET request has to be like quick and fast, you should not put heavy data into it and expect a server to pass all those things and wait for the end user has to wait for all these results, right? So by design itself, in an industry standard, API in a GET API request is not designed to have a request body, right? So where this request body comes into picture? For post request and put request generally, right? So why post and put? We typically input some data into server or post some data into database through server using post and put request. So in those kind of scenarios alone, we'll be needing a request body typically. Again, request body can be of what types? So what types? Any examples? One such example I can give is JSON. Next. XML is next.
Can we do text?
Yeah, text. If we give the body here, I can give. There's something called. We'll come to what is GraphQL a little later, but there is something called raw data. In this raw data, you can choose text, JavaScript, JSON, HTML, XML. These are the raw data that this raw format supports, right? Typically, nowadays, modern day applications typically uses this JSON format. And HTML is there, XML is there, and JavaScript you can pass, JSON you can pass, right? Everything is there. But apart from that, there is something called form data. What is this? What's the use of the form? Why we have to have a separate entity called form data apart from this raw data? Yeah, even you see, even the raw data, when you use a JSON kind of sample, it's a typical key value pairs, right? So the thing with the form data is whenever you encounter a form, right, like forms in any website that you might want to fill, like first name, last name. For example, you're uploading your resume to your database, some career website. You'll give your first name, you'll give your last name, your education details, and all those things, and you upload your resume. So it's a combination of multiple things actually, right? So on this form, the server has to know it's a specific form kind of data, right? That is, it can also expect a file to be uploaded. For example, you can upload your image, you can upload your resume like PDF. These are called binary files, right? So if you see here, there are two types of thing. One is text thing. I can choose to give a key value pair. Key can be like ABC and the value can be something random, like XYZ or something. But when I choose file, right? So the file name I will give, let's say my image, something like that. And I can select a file itself, right? I can select a file and choose to upload and pass this binary file as the request body as a form data itself. So this JSON, XML, HTML, these are the examples of raw data. And there's something called form data, where you have typically by default design itself, suppose key value pairs along with the files to be able to send to server. So whenever you encounter any online website which might request you to submit a form, typically you will see an API request triggered as a form data, right? And there is something called URL encoded form, right? Where use pass an URL and it's actually there's something called URL encoding, right? We'll talk about that a little later. And there is also something called a typical raw binary file also. Without any form data, you can upload a raw binary file itself directly to a server. That is also possible, right? And there's something called GraphQL. How many of you have used a GraphQL kind of or worked with a GraphQL kind of application? Any people? Okay. I don't want to like go into GraphQL and the scope of this like this particular session is not to cover the GraphQL part, but still I'll touch upon what's a GraphQL maybe in the later sessions. But to give you a brief context, typical API, REST API designs will be like you have an endpoint where the information, what you wanted to request or post will be passed in the endpoint itself, right? Something like this. I wanted to get student. I should give what the student as an endpoint API design. and its student ID. Whereas in GraphQL, and if I want to pass any query parameter, I can pass, right? Like put a question mark and first name and equal to value and ampersand symbol to separate query parameter and last name equal to value, and all those things are there. Whereas GraphQL, you can, it's not a JSON, but you can say it's a kind of a JSON kind of structure, right? Where you can explicitly state what kind of data that you wanted to require from a database by giving it as a key value pair. Right? It's a rough idea, right? A raw idea. It's not exactly what I mean. Right? So you can explicitly state or kind of provide a detailed information of what kind of resource that you wanted to post or get from a server, right? So that's the use of a GraphQL. I think it's designed by Facebook and later made as open source project. Okay, and these are typical kind of request body. Okay. And what are the other components of an API request? Anything that you might think? We have an endpoint, we have header information, we have a request body, and what else? What are the other data that you might send or receive? Any answers? I think I spoke about this previously. So there's something called status code, right? Every API request will have something called status code. In this example, it's a 200 OK, right? For example, this is actually short URL service that we have generated for our internal purposes. Okay? So what's the status code? I think we saw in detail last week also. So 200 is for OK, right? Success response. 200 series, right? 400 series is typically for client-side error, and 500 series is typically for server-side errors, right? If client is not authorized, or if he sends some bad data, it's client-side. It's a 400 series kind of error, right? Whereas if a server is not responding properly, if the server is down, it's a 500 kind of error, right? And what else can be a component of an API? What else? There's something called the response time, right? How many of you seen this actually in an API request? Why this is important actually? Why this response time is important? If you go to Google, okay, open the network tab, hit the refresh. Can you see here? There's something called time column, right? For performance, yes. For example, no, it's not a single person who is going to use this website actually, right? It's a bunch of people. For example, Google homepage in India, this is google.co.in is the Indian version of the same website, right? If you access the same website in US, it's google.com, it's a US page. Google customizes and targets its particular user base. Okay. But it's not like only one person is going to access a particular website or particular data from a server or an API. It's going to be for a very large user basis application like Instagram or Facebook or Google. It's going to be millions of users at a time. So can you anyone give me a rough estimate of how much data, how much one server can handle? Let's say we have a server that is running. How much do you think one server can handle at a time? Maybe 500 requests at a time, 600, 700. 500 is actually like when I say at a time in a single instant, a single millisecond or a single second, that kind of 500 is kind of a normal. If you go beyond 500, 600, it's kind of overloading the server, right? It will respond by something called queuing mechanism, right? Your API request will be queued in the server end. and it will be like let perform data. So the queuing time and the time request to process the data, everything will become overhead, and it will lead to something called like performance degradation. Right? As the queuing time increases exponentially, as more and more requests are queued, more and more requests are also coming. So the wait time increases exponentially, right? Which we do not want. So let's say, so we have seen like for an average case, a particular one server can handle about 500 requests. What if some 10,000 requests are coming at a time? So what can we do in a server end to handle all the 10,000 requests without any delay? Any answers for that? No. See, as an API tester, it's important for us to understand all these concepts. There's something called horizontal scaling, right? What's the horizontal scale? What's a vertical and horizontal scaling? Example. What's a vertical scaling? Before going to horizontal scaling, what's a vertical scaling? So vertical scaling is something you increase the capacity of your computer server. For example, if there are only 4 core CPUs in that particular machine, you increase to 8 core CPU or something like that. If there are only 8 GB of RAM, you increase to 16 GB of RAM or whatever, right? That's called vertical scaling. But horizontal scaling is connecting computers together so that every computer, all the computers act as a single entity, right? To scale the power of the performance horizontally by connecting computers itself together, but not by increasing configurations of a single computer alone, right? For example, if I connect another computer with the same system, so one time, if the 500 requests will go to the one server, second set of 500 requests will go to the another server for processing, right? So by doing this horizontal scaling, we are able to like manage all the 10,000 requests maybe by connecting 20 servers as such, right, at a time. So, so this is a typical example of horizontal scaling, and the companies like AWS. I hope like people who are in IT industry is aware of data outage in AWS last week. Anyone who is aware of this? AWS has a very large data outage. AWS outage last week in the region called US East 1. Right? Many of the services were affected, even we were affected by that. Even Amazon services like Prime Video and IMDb were affected in many regions. Right? So what happened there? If one computer gets affected, and if a series of computers is getting connected in the same local network, everything will be affected. In turn, it will create a ring effect, right? I think Amazon has posted a detailed RCA of why that happened. You can go and read it in Amazon's page actually. So this performance testing is very, very important. I think you might be already aware of some performance testing tools like LoadRunner or JMeter. But there are other modern performance tools also. Maybe we'll talk about it later. So as an API tester, even like it's a developer's responsibility also, but it's equally a tester's responsibility also. Whenever a new set of feature comes, there will be always new set of APIs for that, right? We typically always have to do an performance test if it's a customer-facing application, especially, right? Okay. I hope one person is aware of that AWS outage. Okay. Okay. So, so these are the typical components of an API request. Now, now we'll see an example. So I have already registered with this app. I'll show you something called so this is a typical. We'll be using this example for many things that we are going to see in this course. Actually, right? There's a website called Open Weather Map. You can go to this website. Okay, you can go to this Open Weather Map website, and you can register yourself in this website, right? For example, if you're not a part of this website, right, you can either sign in or sign up. Okay, so you can just create an account. I already have an account here. You can just create an account, and after creating an account, you can go to this API section, right? And they will give you some APIs. See, if you see here, it says like what's the current weather data, hourly forecast for 4 days, right? And this one call API, right? It will say minute forecast, hourly and daily forecast, and all those things, and climatic forecast for 30 days. So what are these things actually? This is a typical example of a weather API. Why a company has to expose all these APIs for us? So see, when I go to Google and I hit some, let's say, Mumbai weather, right? So it gives me some series of weather. So weather of Mumbai over the period of next 7 days. So does Google store all this information? Any answers? No, right? So where does this Google get? I think I said last week also. This from this website called weather.com, right? But similarly, there are various other websites which has this weather information or weather data, maybe in its databases, or maybe those kind of like application also communicates with other actual weather API services to get all this data, right? So Google uses a kind of API like this, which is going to hit this weather.com and get this information for you in the Google page. Like Google is showing you in the nice UI format, but actually Google is going to receive this API, this information like this in a typical JSON format. But Google UI is going to convert this typical JSON format in the presentable format for you to, like in a table or graph or kind of data for us to better understand the picture. Okay. But the actual data that might be coming from the weather.com or whatever is going to be a kind of raw data like this, right? So for our example, you are going to use this. So once you go to this API, right, they'll give you something called, they'll be giving you this information, right? Hey, if you wanted to get a particular information, what you want to do is you want to hit this endpoint. So again, what is the structure? What is this called? This part of a URL called. Any answers? Any answers? No, it's not endpoint, it's domain, right? Yeah, someone answered correctly. It's a domain actually, right? And what is this API called? This part of the URL called? This openweathermap.org is domain. What is this API called? API is subdomain, right? And what is this part called? /data/2.5/weather. This is actually called endpoint, not param query. This is actually endpoint, right? In this endpoint, why we have to have this odd number called 2.5? Why it has to be 2.5? What does this 2.5 represent? Yes, it's an API version. I am glad that many of you know this. Right? There's something called API version, which every typical services companies maintain, right? If you wanted to give additional information or you want to upgrade a new set of APIs, so you'll be increasing the version for the people to know that hey, this is not the old API anymore. These APIs have changed, but this is a new API, right? But why we have to have a versioning in an API? What's a use of that versioning in API. Why we have to have a version in API? Any good answers? New features will be newer version. Yes, that is one of the answer. But what is the major reason? See, you are exposing some APIs, right? That API is going to be used by various other companies or websites that is relying on your API. Suddenly you change your API structure, right? So with respect to your change, they also have to change and do a large testing on their end, agree or not. They rely on the key value pair structure that you send to them, right? If you change the API structure entirely for a new version of an API, then it's a responsibility of them to also react to your changes. It's not only about reaction to your changes, it's also about to an entire regression testing in their end. Agree? So that the things work as expected in their end also. What if weather.com changes their API and you are not even seeing this UI because of some API changes, key value pair changes? Right? So what people do is they typically have this version. Hey, I'm going to support this version 1 also. I'm also going to support the version 2 also, right? So when we say like this, version 2 might be little advanced, but you will have the time. People who are consuming these services will have the time to make the changes slowly and steadily in their end and migrate their services by doing some extensive testing, right, from their end also. So that's why we need an API version. Okay. Point taken. So this is an endpoint, and what is this called? This part called query parameter. One quick thing about this is we are passing the authorization part, that is the API key, in the query parameter itself instead of header. People can choose to design their APIs in a number of ways. Open weather map API chose to do in this way, right? Same thing only we're hitting here. Right? We're hitting open weather map.org, right? And this is the endpoint. And here I'm giving the city information Q is equal Coimbatore, right? And app ID is equal. This is the API key that they have generated for me. If you register in this website, you'll get a unique API key for you. So it's a free version. It's not a paid at all. So we can go ahead and please register with this service, right? So now if you see here, we'll just try to analyze the response. I mean, until now, whatever we saw is fine, right? There are no queries or concerns regarding that. I hope it's a very simple thing only, whatever we saw. Yeah. So now coming back to the response, we'll put a little analysis on this response. Okay, someone is asking why we need to put an API key in parameter. Isn't it unsafe? And generally, it is unsafe. Yes, I agree with you. But in this case, it is not. Why? Anyway, they are providing this information for the testing purposes only this website also. And but generally, why this information is not unsafe? I mean, why it is like it's not unsafe? Because it's not a user-sensitive information, right? It's a weather data. Anyone can have access to weather data, right? Or not? Agree or not? Weather is a common data that can be accessed by anyone in any part of the world. It's not like only this website is going to provide this service, right? So because of that, they have not worried about the security and on those aspects too much. So they have designed to use the API key within the query parameter. But when you are dealing with a real-time application, actually, if developers or product people come with a requirement to put the query parameter in the, to put the API keys in the query parameter, please go ahead and say no. It's totally wrong approach. Okay. Okay. It's a very good question, actually. Thank you, Rohit, for asking that. And we'll try to do some analysis over this API response, right? So, what is this called? Typically, a JSON response starts with this curly braces and ends with curly braces, right? This is how JSON is constructed. So what is this, whatever I'm highlighting here called? This is called JSON object, right? So I have a JSON object called COORT. And it has this latitude, longitude information key under it, right or not? This is a JSON object. Right? And what is the second thing called? And I highlight that. This is JSON object, but what is this called? So JSON array. Why is it JSON array? Because we have JSON array is a combination of multiple JSON objects put together in a single key, right? Using this square brackets here. And we'll have, and inside this is a JSON object, right or not? The JSON array is a combination of multiple JSON objects, right? And this is a typical, it's not a JSON object, this is just a string with a key and value, right? Again, this is a JSON object. And inside this JSON object also, this is just a string with a key and value, right? And other things we all know, right? So typically, what kind of data, typically we know the JSON structure, the key has to be a string, right or not? Key definitely has to be a string, right? So what are the types that values can be? Here the values, the float or double value, right? Here the value is an integer value, integer. Here the value is string, right? So apart from the examples given here, what can be the other types of values? Right, I'll post it. Values can be a double value. One second, can we have an array of multiple values for a key? What do you mean by array of multiple values for a key? I didn't quite get the question. Anyway. So we have a double. Yes, so we have a string. We have response code is equal to 200, 200. Yes, we can have, but that will be an array, right? For example, let's say response code is the key here, right? It will be a string, and the values will be an array here. 200, 201. Like this, right? This is possible. And these values can be integer also, it can be string also. This array can represent whatever data that you might have, right? Okay. And integer is supported, and Boolean is supported, right? It's also supported. And what else? A typical example. Okay, Boolean is true or false value. I can have something called some key like is required or something like that, and I can put I can put true or false here. Right? This is also possible. Right? And what is the other example? Can I have null as a value? This one. Can I have null as a value? Yes. So What's the problem with dealing in null type of data? It's a worldwide problem for software engineers, right? What's the problem with having null as a data? Null pointer, yes. So always when you try to parse the data, right, typically always it's necessary to have a null pointer check before doing any operations over there. Maybe that's necessary. So most of the cases, if you expect null import endpoint exception, is going to throw a failure return server. Why null allowed? Null is universally allowed. It's not like only like this particular service is null allowed or not in JSON-P. Null is universally accepted and allowed and accepted throughout many systems, right? And JSON being inherent key coming with the JavaScript kind of implementation, null is obviously allowed. Why not? And there are many scenarios also where you might have a null as your value also. Right? There is, I don't know how many of you are aware of this. You might be aware of, I mean, how many of you are familiar with Java? Anyone is totally new to Java? Java is fine. Okay, yeah, be it any program language, you might typically have these data types, right? In float or double. In Java, especially we have this data type called optional. How many of you are aware of this data type called optional? Please explore this data type, right? This data type is especially designed to handle null values. This is feature from Java 8. Okay. So please go next. Maybe if once we start this rest assured kind of thing, I will also touch upon what's the use of optional. But if you're curious to know it before, like you can explore it. Optional is especially designed to handle null values in the code, right? Okay. So null is also kind of data structure here, right? So I can put the same thing in the Postman executor. You can do it, right? I think I already have one. Sure. I have, but anyway, we'll create a new request. See, coming to Postman, right? Coming to Postman, right? So, what's a Postman actually? Any answers? Why we need a Postman? Yes, it's a client, but we have many clients. Why Postman? That why Postman question will be coming, right? Okay, someone says it's a platform to manual API testing. Yes, not only manual, it can do a kind of some kind of automation also. A tool to send requests and get response. Yes, but it is not only for a response, but it's going to organize your entire APIs, right? Give me a minute. Okay, I was about to show you something, but actually I encountered something which but actually I wanted to show you this also. See, every APIs will have something called status page, right? Not only APIs, the entire website also. You know this tool called Slack, right? What's the Slack? It's a messaging application for your business or companies or enterprise, right? See, I'm trying to load the Slack actually, but for some reason it says a server is not responding, right? And every server will have something called a status page, right? So if I went to the status.slack.com, you see here there are some problems, right? Right. For example, the calls feature in the Slack is currently experiencing some problems, right? So I can view the details here. Right. So typically major companies like this updates what is happening then and there, actually, right, in the status page. Do you know who owns Slack now? Any idea? Any idea? Meanwhile, we'll try to refresh this and try to see. Okay, it has come. What I wanted to show is this UI. See, we have our APIs. This Postman also supports the extensive documentation of your API. Right? I can create an API. I can write some sample code and documentation, all these things here. So, what's another example of documenting your API? Yes, Salesforce owns Slack. Right? It's one of the largest deals that went through. I think it's $27.7 billion. Yes, you have Swagger. So Postman, you can think of as an environment, as a tool, as a kind of complete end-to-end solution to manage all your APIs. Agree with me? Do you agree with me? So what can it do? It can organize your API request in form of collections, right? Collection is nothing like a folder. You used to put different APIs. You can think like that, right? And it can also see, if you go to this API, it can also show what kind of APIs that I currently have inside a particular collection on all those things, right? And the environment, right? I can create different environment and load different data for the same APIs, and I can parameterize those APIs, right? I think one of the, we'll see about the parameterization in detail. This is a typical example of parameterization, right? I can pass this endpoint information from the environment variable, right? This key information, everything. And I can create a mock server to be able to like mock a particular request and response and able to test something. And I can also create some monitors, like monitor is nothing but you can just trigger these APIs, like let's say some kind of Jenkins kind of implementation, right? You can just trigger this APIs at a particular time in a particular day at a particular frequency, and you can test all these response and like what kind of response it gives at what time. Typically used for sanity testing morning every day, right? And this history section, like previous APIs that we might have requested. And also, if you see here, I can import the APIs from a file, from a folder, from a link as a raw text, from the code repository also. How cool is that? I can import this APIs into a Postman also, right? And what else is, everything is organized into something called workspace. You can create multiple workspace by creating this new workspace. Workspace is nothing but collection of group of similar kind of APIs that you are working in a particular environment, right? Maybe in a particular project, you need to totally different workspace for you. Maybe completely different workspace if you are working on a multiple teams, right? So other types of things may there's something called Postman is not only that, there are much more to that. I mean, obviously you can document all your APIs and all those things is there. Yeah, someone was checking one project is called workspace. Yes, something like that you can create like that. It's just Workspace is kind of an organization, or you can put together. The name itself suggests it's a workspace, right? So whatever things that you want to organize, the set of APIs for a particular project, you can put it in a single workspace. And obviously, if there are any API changes that you wanted to do, I can collaborate with others. I can put a comment and read this later. And this is very, very cool section which I actually like. There's something called code. Right? See, this is an Postman implementation of how your API is going to be triggered. Backend is going to use JavaScript to trigger your APIs. But I can get the same API request in a multiple kind of programming language. What's a curl actually? Any answer? I think we saw what's a curl last week also. What's a curl? Curl is something, yes, command line implementation of how do you get a request or response, right? Similarly, see how much language is supports by default. So we focus on Java now, but there is support for Go native and JavaScript and C, Node.js, Objective-C, PHP, Python, Ruby, shell script, everything is there, right? But we'll focus on the Java now. OK, HTTP and UniRest are two different Java libraries, right? To achieve the same thing. What is the thing? Java way of sending a request and getting a response, right? UniRest is famous implementation. We'll go to UniRest for now. Right? You can see this, right? This is a code which UniRest will typically use. It's some kind of a boilerplate code you can think for this request, right? By the way, what's a boilerplate code? Any answers? Okay. Anyway, so when you use this code along with the UniRest library in your Java project, this particular thing is going to be executed, and this response is going to be printed as a string, right? That is the assumption. Right? And what are the other features of like Postman? Someone is asking unit testing framework for Python. I am not sure with respect to Python. I am sure with Java we have JUnit, so maybe I'm not sure. Okay. Okay. So what are the other features of Postman? Very, very important ones actually. There is something called for every API, right? There's something called. Can you see the section? Test section and pre-requirements, right? Prerequisite section, right? So you can actually execute a typical JavaScript code here and do some validations. That's a very important part of Postman, right? So this enables to do some kind of automation actually, right? And by enabling this, you can even generate reports by storing this in your local, maybe Excel or CSV files or whatever. Excel, it's hard, but generally, typically you can store this as a CSV file. It's not Java, it's JavaScript. Yes, it supports only JavaScript scripting. So you can execute your JavaScript here, and the whatever response, typical JSON response that we get, right? You can parse it, can test it whether this response is success or a failure, okay or not, and you can say whether this test has passed or failed. Okay, and you can even generate a small report out of that. And also you can do an extensive API call to another request based on the data available in this particular response, right? We call those kind of requests as webhooks. Anyone heard of this term called webhooks? Yes, right. So webhooks are something which is going to be executed. It's an API only, but it's going to be triggered based on certain event that is going to happen. Right? Okay. So all these are supported through Postman. So Postman is extensively used by developers nowadays to typically create, organize, document, and execute all their API requests, right? Okay. Just give me 2-3 minutes. I'll be back. We'll see more on Explore actually. Okay. Meanwhile, there are a couple of questions to me. Okay, I'll try to answer that. One question is from Rohit. Is asking me like they're using the webhooks to send to check for send, deliver, open, click events for emails. May I know like what product or company that you're working with? Because I work on similar kind of product. I work on a product called email marketing automation tool, right? Wherein we extensively use these webhooks for different purposes, or not the purposes as you say, right? But these open clicks and sent events are maintained by us. Yes, we are also working on email marketing domain. Right? I'm also working on email marketing domain. My company is Fresh Marketer, Freshworks. Instead, the tool is named Fresh Marketer actually. So what happens is we make use of some service called SendGrid. Yeah, explain about this webhook. Yes. Anyone heard of this company? There's a company called SendGrid. I hope you are also using the same. If I'm not wrong. Okay. Okay. So there's this thing called SendGrid. It's a kind of an email sending platform. You can think of this as a typically email sending platform, end-to-end managing platform for emails, right? You can typically register your domain to send the emails via your domain. And you can track how many people have opened, clicked, or sent or delivered or all these emails you can track. But again, this relies on webhook, right? Whenever they'll be encoding this URL or they'll be attaching some kind of, for example, if I wanted to track an open event of an email, what I'll do is I'll just include a small image which of dimension 1 into 1 pixel into that email at the end, right? By encoding it into a particular URL. So whenever the URL is hit, I will know that this particular user has opened the email, right? And that event is triggered as a webhook to our servers where we maintain the data, saying that, hey, this person has opened the email, so that we can register that as like an open event for the particular user. Just give me a minute, I'm getting a call. Okay, so this is a simple example of a webhook, right? How a webhook works. Whenever event is triggered, at the time we will be getting that event. Some service will getting that event triggered on another webhook or another API to another set of server to make use of this data. Right? That is a webhook. So another person was asking like the Postman is used on different API versions and test cases are needed. See, coming to these test cases and all, I just don't want to touch upon this everything in the first initial sessions. I was talking about this prerequisite and test section, right? You can always state it as we have already written some test code here. This is one such example of test case, right? Check if the weather API time is less than 800 milliseconds. Okay, if it is lesser, then it's going to be pass. Otherwise, it's going to be fail, right? And how we can collaborate is Postman has option to collaborate the same workspace with multiple people, right? I can invite people. See, there is an option for invite button. Can you see here, everyone? There's an option to invite people so that we can collaborate this particular APIs with set of people so that they can review, they can even execute the test cases, they can see the results. And we can also export these results as a form of test cases, I mean, CSV or those kind of things. And we can also run this test cases typically by creating monitor in every day automatically. I'm not saying manually. But automatically, hey, ask the Postman to run this thing every day at 8 a.m. or some sanity test, right? We can do that as well. Pull request from Git. See, you can integrate Jenkins by using something called Newman. Okay, but of course, you through that you can pull whatever, push or pull whatever you wanted to store in the repository. But I would not recommend that actually to use with Postman and Newman. For those purposes only, we have something called rest assured library, right? If everything can be done in a Postman, why we have all these libraries? So for those kind of extensive testing and integrating within, it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible to integrate Jenkins or Git or those pipeline. It's and the Postman has a module called Newman. It's a command line interface for a Postman execution. Right? You can technically do that, but not recommend. And one more thing is, it's not like you're going to save this URL in your local. I've installed my Postman in my computer, so it's going to be in my local computer only. You can share this in a Postman cloud. Can you see here? There's something called cloud symbol that is integrated, right? Okay, so whatever the data APIs that are there in your locals also sync with our servers, provided you sign in with your Postman with your like username and password, right? And I think currently Postman free plan has only 3 users at the max, right? See, it's also always saying your team is full. So Postman to an extent is a free tool, but if you want more users or everything in your cloud and managing all those things, it's going to be paid. So someone was asking what's the difference between pre-requested script and actual test. See, before this particular API is triggered, they wanted to execute any script, then I will make use of this tab, right? After I got a response from the server, then I will make use of this tab to run my test. Okay, that's the difference. And why we need to run something prior to our API request, we'll see all those things later. Okay? But this is the purpose of it. Okay? So we'll try to create one collection here. Obviously, if you say like open Postman, I hope you know the Postman previously was a typical Chrome plugin. Hope you know that. Then it became $1 million company, and they have this full-fledged UI to support this integration and all those things. Anyway. So we'll create an entire collection here. I mean, whenever you click on new, right, it says a new request. Okay, what is this WebSocket request actually? Any idea? What's a WebSocket actually? Okay, plugin or run, everything is same only with respect to. I don't find any difference. So coming to WebSocket, what's a WebSocket? WebSocket is when you an API request, in an API request is triggered, a server is response, and that is over, right? That request and response, so entire process is over. Whereas WebSocket, once you open a connection, that connection will stay alive unless you terminate it, right? That's a two-plus communication, two-way communication. A client can also communicate to server. Server can also communicate to a client through this WebSocket channel, right? Can you think of a typical example where this WebSocket is used actually? Your messaging applications, right? Like WhatsApp and all those things. It typically requires your tunnel or a WebSocket to be open so that connection is that. So connection has to be connection can be initiated from the client and server end. And once the WebSocket is established, through that socket alone, communication happens between server and a client. Okay. Okay. I mean, the environment, I told you what's an environment, told you what's workspace, I told you what's an AP documentation, AP small server monitor. Anyway, you create a collection. just the names collection as a weather sample in December. I can like give some authorization. These things are not necessary typically for a collection type anyway. See, if you open a collection, I can also see some documentation here, right? I can also create some documentation here. You see this. I can also like pull and push and fork all these collections actually. It's a concept of Git, but not exactly Git actually. Right? Anyway, I hope you people have worked on Git. If not, please learn that. So someone was asking, can we make API data driven? Yes, we can make. For that purpose only we have something called environment, right? You can put all this data here, run this particular test for multiple data. But again, I would not recommend going end-to-end data-driven framework using Postman. For that purpose only we have rest assured. So we have already created a collection, weather example December, right? So in this particular thing, I'm going to create a request. See this, it also says the collection is empty, add a request. I can also add a request by saying like this, right? I can click on these 3 dots here and say add request, right? So I can say this request as weather API. Okay. Now I can copy this endpoint. And put it here. Once you put here, by default, Postman identifies, hey, there are some query parameters in the URL, and there is an extensive option called the params. You see here, and those query parameters are parsed and put in this section called params. Okay? So that we don't have to modify this URL directly here. I can come to this param section, modify everything in param section. So neatly organized, right? It's a feature extensive to Postman, right? We make use of this feature and test out query parameters or change parameters or whatever, right? So since this app ID is part of query parameters itself, we don't have any extensive authorization. So we'll leave that part. Typically, Postman automatically generates some headers for it, as we saw previously. We don't have any authorization here. Do we need a request body? So no. This one, no, right? Yes. So since it's a GET request, we don't have any request body, so we keep it as none. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit this. It also says send a node. I can download the API, but we'll see that later. I just now hit send actually. So it's giving me a response, right? Just open this response. It's actually response body, but actually the raw data will be something like this. Okay. But this is the parsed data from the Postman, so it looks clean and neat. Pretty printing of the JSON response, right? If you see here the same result, whatever we got in our browser, along with the status code. Status code you can see in the browser when you open the intro tab, but these things are extensively available here itself. And if there are any cookies set, no, there are no cookie sets. These are the response headers. Okay. The server here is from OpenRest implementations and date information, content type, content link, connection key feature they were terminate. And what is the catch key? Catch key, they have given the endpoint around the city name itself here. Right? There are some access controls. We'll see what all these things maybe later when we explore what are the cores and what the purpose of all these things. Right? So we have this typical response headers things, right? A cookie, if there are any, we'll have cookie and we have response body. And in what time the response is initiated, and you can see the breakup, right? Socket initialization took this much time, DNS lookup took this much time, TCP handshake is there, right? To successfully establish connection between there. An SSL handshake is if it's an HTTP request, we have SSL handshake also. And for that only it took so much long time. So once that SSL handshake is done, the request is processed and transfer started. This much time they took for transfer, 97.73 milliseconds. And for data download, 11 milliseconds. So totally it took around 518 milliseconds in total. Okay. You can choose to save this response to an example or a file. We'll see all these things later. Now, can I copy this same thing? Now, Postman GET request we saw. I can also do the same thing via your curl. Right? If you go to this code section, I'll change it to curl. Okay. So you can just copy option here. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll go to the terminal. I'll paste, maybe clear this section. Okay, I'll paste this curl here and hit send. Give me the same response, right? In the terminal also, we can access the same data. Okay. So this is about the GET request. We'll see how to pass the data maybe in later sessions. But understanding a GET request, you're able to get what is actually happening here. How the server process this data and sends this data back, right? And how this Postman is able to process this particular thing and senses. I hope those things are a little clear. You can respond in chat if anything is okay. Okay, I'll take this as an yes thing. So, do the browser like supports put, post, and delete requests by default? No, right? So, for those purposes also, we need a Postman kind of tool to execute put, post, and delete. And another question is terminal, this window is capable of executing put, post, and delete data? Any guesses? If you answer this correctly, I think you might already have more than enough knowledge to understand it. So the answer is yes, right? Terminal also has the capability to execute post and post. At the end of the day, curl is a library. It's utility, right? Command line utility to process all your data, like similar to Postman. So to test this put to post and delete, see, I'm being a developer in a company. I can create my own server. I'll show these examples maybe towards the end of the course. Right? See, this is one such project that I'm working in. You know what's a short URL service? Short URL generator. We have something called bit.ly, right? You know this website called bit.ly. Yes. So similarly, for our project, I am working on a short URL generator. So this is the thing we have created, server we have created, and people can hit these APIs to generate a short URL. Maybe I'll show you a small demo here. See. Now this is the applications we have developed. For example, if I want to generate a short, this is not a short URL actually, but for testing purpose. I mean, this is longer than www.google.com, obviously, but for example, if I want to generate an alternative URL for google.com, I have to just hit this service, this endpoint called fresh URL/API/v1/app/links. Okay. If I hit send, it's going to generate me a response, short URL response, right? But short URL is actually LPD. Okay. So what I can do is, if you see here, I can go to the browser and I'll say demo. Okay. This is our endpoint, right? And if we give the short URL here, okay, the short URL generated is LPT, right? I'll copy this and we'll give it here. Okay. What happens is it's going to take me to google.com, right? For that google.com only, I've generated the shortened URL. For example, if I wanted to update this shortened URL, for example, let's say for update, what should I do? Is I have to go to the server and refer what app that I've created. See, there's something called app controller, right? Every API request will come to this controller section. Just don't worry too much about this. There's something called patch mapping, right? So what I'll do is go to this and change this request to patch, okay? And I have to give this short URL here, copy this LPT and give it here. That is endpoint that we have designed right, by default. You see here, it's expecting API/v1/app/links/ short URL to update the URL, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this account ID, which we internally use. Instead of google.com, I'm going to say yahoo.com. Okay. I'm going to generate a different like redirection URL for the same short URL, right? And I'm going to hit send. Just change to yahoo.com. Let's check if the service is working. So if I use the same data now, it should take me to yahoo.com now. Not the subject. Yeah, it's taking me to Yahoo site, right? So you're getting what we are trying to do here actually. So this is our service. I'm not going to go deep into our service. This is currently what we are working on. But for the demo purpose, what I'm going to do is there's one website called reqres.in. Okay, I also want you to go have a look into this website, right? They have created this website. Like very few people have created this website. Actually, to mock your get put post and delete requests. Actually, okay. So as if you see here, just if I click on get, it will show me what kind of endpoint that you should use. Okay, and if I click on this for single user, this is the request endpoint. This is the response. Okay. And they are also mimicking a not found case also. For example, if we give some user ID which is not there in the database, return 404, right? And if you get all the data, they are having the APIs for that as well, right? And for post also they are having the API. Right? This is the endpoint API/users, and in the request body you have to give this. Okay, and the response you will get this. For put also they have some similar kind of API mock and patch and delete. Okay. So we can make use of this website for our testing purposes, for demo purposes, so that we can better understand post and delete requests. Okay. So Rohit was asking put versus patch. Why both for update? What's the difference? See, patches like if you definitely know some data is there, some resources there in the server that you are going to update, right? For example, the shortened URL space which I was showing you, it's a patch. It's right because I have updated Google to Yahoo here, right? But whereas put is not applicable, it's applicable in a sense that if this particular endpoint is not there, then create a new shortened URL for this endpoint, right? That's what we are trying to achieve here. Shortened URL with the same name, LP, right? So put is something you will use when you wanted to create a new record, when there are no records to update. Whereas patch, if you use differently, there are some records to update, you are going to update the record. If there are no records to update in patch, it's going to throw you an error, right? Something like 414 not found, something like that. Okay. So here we have value to update, yes, because of that only we are using patch here, right? We are not using put. So put is something you want to, it's a combination of both patch and post, right? If the data is there, then update the data. If the data is not there, then create a new record. That's a put. It's intermediary between post and patch. Again, these are conventions. I think I also said you previously also, I guess. See, get request is used for what? What's the purpose of a get request? Receive data. So my question to you is, can I use a get request to post the data into a server? What if I say yes, it is possible? Okay. What if I say it's possible? I'll say you why. Okay. It is possible. I'll say you why. So this is a typical server code, right? For example, there's some get request here. When you use an operation called get mapping, and with this /app/id, I can get some data here. Here, I have written a code in such a way that I'm going to return some data. Okay. But anyway, the request is going to come to this endpoint only, right? What if this request is going to come, and if this ID is not there, this is the code that I wrote, right? What if I rewrote this code by saying that, hey, if this ID is not there, just create a new record in the database, or in other terms, in other sense, post some data into a database with some data into it. So it's a get request only, but by using this code, by modifying this code, I can post the data into a database. Okay? You're getting what I'm trying to say? So it all depends upon convention. So the convention is, in other words, the unwritten rule is that you cannot, you should not. Okay, it's not that you cannot, you should not like to post data in a get request, right? It's a bad code. Okay? So in typical code review, people reject your code, and they'll ask you to rewrite the code. Right? It's just a convention. It's not like it's totally impossible to do. You're getting the point. Okay. Even put and patch is a convention, right? What if I'm using patch for put and put for patch? Who can question me? Right? It's my server. So it's a convention to do that. So many people by default thinks that Git cannot do post or put cannot do patch, patch cannot do put, something like that. They used to think it's not the case. It's all depending upon what you write in the code. Yes, your understanding is correct. Put will update a resource if exists, otherwise create new, patch will only update. Again, it's a convention. It can be otherwise also. But generally, developers, they develop, it is in this way. Okay? So not able to go to Postman. I think I already have a collection. Yeah. One more thing. Inside a collection, I can create a folder also. So that I can add a folder. It's not a collection; it's only an organizing thing in Postman. Yeah, a collection is a group of APIs which does a similar job, right? Even in this API, there may be sub APIs. There may be you wanted to separate out your put APIs or get APIs, right? So I can organize the entire collections as well, right? So in this example, I have created the CRUD collection. Right? CRUD is what? What's CRUD? What is CRUD? No answer, some. C is create, R is read, U is update, and D is delete. Okay. So this we call a CRUD operation. Typically, post. In other words, in Postman terms, post, get, put or patch on delete, right? Okay. We'll see this. You can even mock. Mock this request. For example, if you want to get the list of entire users, right? They have given the endpoint as /API/users, and the query parameter page is equal to 2. Okay. We copy this, and I'll directly go to the browser, and I'll put. I just paste it here. Okay. Whatever I copied here, and I'm pasting it here. Okay. Will it work or not? That's the question. Wait, what? Yes, right. So this is the domain. This is the API that they have provided, and this is the response that we have got. So, what is this page is equal to 2? This is a query parameter. We all know. But there are some special types of query parameters. Okay, I can give page is equal to 1. That is going to be returned. You have to understand there's a concept of in API, there's a concept called pagination. I mean, if you are opening this thing. Yes. Yes or no? Yes. So why do we need to paginate? For example, I'm giving page is equal to 1. I'm getting some data. Tracy, Charles, George, Janet. I'm giving 2. Maybe some other data. Michael, Lindsay, Tobias. Right? Why we have to paginate data? Why can't I get all the data on a single page? What can be the reason? Put huge data in many pages. Yes. Okay, that might be the secondary reason I might think of. The point is correct. I cannot put if there are 1,000 data, I cannot put all the 1,000 data on single page. It will be too much chunky and clunky to look to make the page lighter. But that's the second reason. What's the primary reason? As an API tester, we should always think about what happens in the server, right? Sorted data. I mean, sort comes as a package in the pagination, right? Sort and all. That's not a thing. But why? I think it will take time. Yes, that's a reason, right? See, our databases are kind of limited in how much data it can handle at a time. In a typical MySQL database, columns that you have indexed, you can index a column for information. People who don't know, you can index a column. Right? So when you fetch the data from the column which I index, it will be typically faster. For example, primary keys are a default indexed in MySQL database, right? I can say select star from student where ID is equal to 1. So when I say ID is equal to 1, ID is an indexed column since it's a primary key. So it will take a constant time, or in other words, very less time to fetch the data. What if I'm searching the student by its email? Select star from student where email is equal to something, something like this, right? obs.concare.request.in. It will take more time or less time than ID. Obviously, more time, right? But what if your database has millions of records? So you have to always think in a scale. Just 1% or 2% is not going to use your data. We don't design our application just for for 1 or 2 persons to use, right? They're always going to design a system for millions of people to use. Millions of people will have millions of data, typically resulting in millions of records in a database. So for a MySQL to search a data into database, it will take a long time, right? And to process all the, for example, if I select all the students from a database, it's going to take a hell lot of time for the server to get all these data, put it into a proper format, and return it back to a server, right? So it's going to take lots and lots of time. So for the primary purpose of performance, we are going to paginate. Okay. Even in pagination, you have to be very specific. What kind of column that I'm querying for, right? I have to always query with the column that have indexed in a SQL kind of database. Whereas a NoSQL is a different scenario, right? Different NoSQL solutions will have different kind of implementation. My favorite NoSQL solutions are Elasticsearch and Cassandra. Okay. So, and sorting comes by default along with the pagination concept. I can say sort is called ASC or DESC to sort ascending or descending. Right. Okay. So can we proceed? So I have the same. Okay, let's create a. I want to create an add request. It's going to be a get request. Or let's forget about get. We'll do some other request. Actually. We'll do a post actually. So in post, you typically have a request body, right? Post, let me see. It doesn't have anything anyway. Request.in/API/users. That's the endpoint. Okay. So what I'm just going to copy this request body. I'm going to paste it here. And it's a raw data. It's a JSON format. See, if you use some other format, it's not going to highlight, right? This is a text, so everything's a text according to it. Showing some warning also, right? Content type is different. What you are given is different. Okay. So I'll give a JSON. It's a post request. In headers, I don't have to typically give anything. It should work. Let's see. Yeah. So it's giving me some data, right? With the name and job that we have given, height that we has generated, and the time. Okay. Created time. Okay. So typical post request will have a request body. And see what's the status here. Instead of 200, it's 200. What's the 201 status code? What's the 201 status code?
A record is created.
Yes, record is created. Again, my question is, they are written in 201, but is it possible I mean, 404, obviously we know it's not found, right? For example, they have successfully created this record in their backend, okay, but also returning 404. Technically, it is possible or not? Hello? Technically, yes. I'm glad that people have answered it. Yes, technically it's possible. Even though record is created, technically it's possible to return 404 also. It all depends upon what code you write in the backend. But it gives a wrong sense of information to the user who is going to consume the service. Right? That's the only caveat. But technically it's possible. Okay. So it's also totally okay to return 200. 201 is not the only go-to standard to say it's created. 200 is also. Anyway, we will stop with this for today's session, right? And we'll continue tomorrow. So, any questions or queries that you might have for the last two sessions or whatever you saw today? Some dead silence. Someone's asking, post do you get only 201 code? No, as I said, status code can be anything. Some developers choose to return 200, some choose to return 201. Both are totally fine. Okay. You can return random code like 9 if you want. But they're also not supported in Postman. That's a different story. So you can return 404, you can return 403, whatever you want. Totally developers, but typical convention is 200, 201 totally. Like 200 series, okay. Any other questions or queries? Okay. I hope these sessions were super useful for you people. Right? So what I want is always like think in the perspective, don't think in the perspective of what just happens in front of your eyes, but also think in the perspective of what actually happens in the background. Okay? When you trigger an API request, what actually happens, how this is able to get this data. So if you think in that perspective and test, it's going to be much useful for long term for an application if you're testing and for technical development as well. Okay. So can we close the session then?
Okay, thanks, Karthik.
Okay.
Thanks, Karthik.
Thank you, Karthik, so much.
Thank you everyone for joining. Have a nice day. A nice night wherever you are. Bye.